The envelope hit the kitchen table with a sound that seemed to echo through Natalie Parker's entire world. Coffee splashed over the rim of her mug as her stepmother Miranda slammed her palm down beside the crumpled paper. Her face flushed with a mixture of desperation and cold calculation. "You will marry him, Natalie. I won't take no for an answer." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, acrid and suffocating. Natalie's fingers trembled as she set down her mug, the ceramic clinking against the chipped Formica countertop of their cramped apartment kitchen. Outside, the morning traffic of downtown Chicago created a distant hum, but inside this room, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "Marry who?" Natalie's voice came out smaller than she intended, barely above a whisper. Miranda's laugh was sharp, humorless. She pulled out her phone with jerky movements, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. John Klene, the black sheep of the Klene family empire. Fresh out of Stateville Correctional Center. The photo Miranda thrust toward her showed a man with hollow cheeks and tired eyes, stubble covering his jaw, wearing what looked like a prison-issued jumpsuit and some kind of intake photo. He appeared ordinary, forgettable even, the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd. "He's a nobody," Miranda continued, her voice gaining momentum like a freight train. "Convicted felon with nothing to his name. But his family has money. Natalie, more money than we could ever dream of. And they're willing to pay handsomely for someone to marry their embarrassment and clean up their public image." Natalie stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process the information. The man looked lost, defeated. "Human, I don't understand. Why me? Why would they want me to marry a complete stranger?" "Because you're beautiful, educated, and most importantly," Miranda leaned across the table, her breath sharp with coffee, "in desperation, you have no choice." The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. She thought of her grandmother May lying in the cardiac intensive care unit at Northwestern Memorial, machines beeping steadily around her frail form. The doctors had been clear that without immediate surgery, May had days, maybe hours left. The procedure would cost $87,000, money they simply didn't have. "Your grandmother doesn't have time for your moral objections," Miranda continued, mistaking Natalie's silence for defiance. "The Klene family is offering to pay for everything, her surgery, her recovery, all of it, in exchange for 1 year of marriage to their problem child." Natalie's phone buzzed against the table. Dr. Martinez's name appeared on the screen, and her heart clenched. She answered with shaking fingers. "Ms. Parker, you need to come to the hospital immediately. Your grandmother's condition has deteriorated overnight. We're moving her surgery up to this afternoon, but we need to discuss payment arrangements." First, the phone slipped from Natalie's numb fingers. Through the kitchen window, she could see the city stretching endlessly in all directions. Millions of people living their normal lives while hers crumbled around her. May had raised her after. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. May had worked double shifts at the diner to pay for Natalie's college education, never missing a single graduation or achievement, never asking for anything in return except love. "Where do I sign?" The words came out flat, emotionless, Miranda's. Expression shifted to something resembling relief mixed with triumph. She pushed the envelope across the table. "The meeting is set for this afternoon, 2 o'clock at Murphy's Cafe on State Street. Don't be late." As Natalie stared down at the contract that would change her life forever, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple marriage of convenience. The photograph of John Klene stared back at her from Miranda's phone, but something in his eyes suggested there was more to this story than anyone was telling her. Something that would either save her or destroy her completely. Murphy's Cafe smelled of burnt coffee and broken dreams. Its checkered linoleum floor sticky beneath Natalie's worn sneakers. She sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee she'd been stirring for 10 minutes straight. Watching the door with the intensity of a hawk watching prey, the contract felt heavy in her purse, each page representing another piece of her freedom she was about to sell. Outside, Chicago's afternoon sun filtered through grimy windows, casting everything in a sepia tone that made the whole scene feel like something from an old noir film. The bell above the door chimed, and Natalie looked up, expecting to see the hollow-cheeked man from the photograph. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. The man who entered was tall, easily 6 feet, with dark hair that caught the light and a jawline that belonged in a magazine. His charcoal suit was tailored perfectly to his athletic frame, and when he moved, it was with the kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. This was not a man who had spent time in prison. This was not a man who needed anyone's help. Their eyes met across the cafe, and something electric passed between them. His were blue, not the dull gray she'd expected, but a deep blue like the ocean during a storm. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he was walking toward her table with purposeful strides, and Natalie felt her world tilt off its axis. Natalie Parker, his voice was deep, cultured, with the kind of accent that spoke of private schools and country clubs. He extended a hand that was clean, manicured, without a single callus or scar. "John Klene, it's a pleasure to meet you." Natalie stared at his outstretched hand as if it might bite her. "You're not him." A smile played at the corners of his mouth, transforming his face from merely handsome to devastatingly attractive. "I'm not who you expected, you mean." The photograph Miranda showed me was of a completely different man. John slid into the booth across from her with fluid grace, and suddenly the space felt too small, the air too thin.
Ow.
"Photographs can be misleading, may I?" She nodded mutely, still trying to reconcile the man before her with everything she'd been told. He was nothing like a convicted felon, nothing like someone who needed his family's help. If anything, he looked like he could buy and sell the entire cafe without checking his bank balance. "I know this situation is unconventional," John said, leaning forward slightly. The movement brought with it the scent of expensive cologne. And something else, something uniquely him, that made her pulse quicken. "But I want you to know that I'll take care of you. This isn't a real marriage, obviously, but during our time together, you won't want for anything." Burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why do you need to get married? You clearly don't need money, and you definitely weren't in prison. So what's really going on here?" For the first time since he'd sat down, John hesitated. His fingers drummed once against the table, a tell that suggested he wasn't as composed. As he appeared, "Let's say my family has certain expectations. Requirements I need to meet to maintain access to things that are important to me." "What kind of things?" "Control of the family business, my inheritance, my freedom to make decisions without interference." He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket. "The important thing is that your grandmother's surgery is being performed. As we speak, the payment has already been processed." Natalie's hands flew to her phone, and sure enough, there was a text from Dr. Martinez confirming that May was in surgery and everything was proceeding smoothly. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a new kind of fear. This man had just paid nearly $100,000 without blinking. What exactly was she getting herself into? "There are conditions," John continued, watching her carefully. "We'll need to live together for 6 months, appear at family functions, convince my relatives that our relationship is genuine. Convince them how? They'll test us. Watch how we interact, whether we know personal details about each other. If we show natural affection," his blue eyes held hers steadily. "We'll need to be convincing, Natalie. My family didn't build their fortune by being easily fooled." The weight of what he was asking began to settle on her shoulders. "You're saying we'll have to pretend to be in love? I'm saying we'll have to be a couple in every way that matters to outside observers?" Something in his tone sent heat racing through her veins. She told herself it was fear, but the way he was looking at her suggested it might be something else entirely. Something more dangerous. "Your grandmother is going to be fine," John said softly, apparently reading her internal struggle. "Surgeon Dr. Martinez recommended is the best cardiac specialist on the East Coast. She'll have the finest care money can buy." Natalie looked down at the contract in the envelope. Her entire future reduced to legal terms and conditions. But May would live. That was all that mattered. "Where do I sign?" As she picked up the pen, John's hand briefly covered hers. His skin was warm, and she noticed he wore a signet ring. With an intricate family crest. "Natalie, there's something else you should know." She looked up at him, pen poised over the signature line. "My family is intense. I want to know everything about you, about us, and they're not easily satisfied. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so intimate it should have felt presumptuous, but instead sent shivers up her arm. Are you prepared for that? She signed her name with steady strokes. Natalie couldn't help but wonder if she was signing a marriage contract or selling her soul to the devil himself. Either way, there was no turning back now. The Klene estate rose from the Chicago suburbs like something from a fever dream. All stone and glass and old money grandeur. Natalie pressed her face to the passenger window of John's Tesla, watching manicured lawns roll past until they reached a circular driveway dominated by a fountain that probably costs more than most people's houses. It's temporary, John said, cutting the engine. His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before, tension threading through his usual confidence. Until we find our own place. John, this isn't a house. This is a small country. Before he could respond, the massive front doors opened and a woman emerged who looked like she'd stepped out of a high-fashion magazine. Helena Klene was 60, but could have passed for 45. Her silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon, wearing a cream silk dress that probably cost more than Natalie's car. John, darling. Helena descended the steps with her arms open, moving with the kind of grace that came from decades of finishing school and ballet lessons. Finally, and this must be the famous Natalie. So she were a celebrity rather than a broke graduate student who just sold herself into a marriage of convenience. John kissed Helena's cheek, and Natalie noticed how his entire posture changed in his aunt's presence, becoming more guarded, more careful. Aunt Helena, this is Natalie Parker. Helena. My Aunt Helena runs the family. Helena took Natalie's hands in both of hers, and her smile was warm enough too. Melt steel. Darling, what a pleasure to finally meet you. John has told us so much about you. Natalie shot John a confused glance. When exactly had he talked about her? They'd met 3 hours ago. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Klene. Helena, please. Family now, she guided them. Toward the house with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to orchestrating social situations. Come, everyone is dying to meet the woman who finally captured our John's heart. The entry hall was a study in understated opulence. Marble floors reflected light from a crystal chandelier that hung like captured starlight above a double staircase that curved gracefully to the second floor. Oil paintings in heavy gilt frames lined the walls, and Natalie recognized at least 2 that she'd seen in her art history textbooks. Everyone, she whispered to John. I should have mentioned my family is large, he murmured back, but before he could elaborate, people began emerging from various doorways, as if summoned by some invisible signal. The patriarch appeared first, a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes who moved with the aid of an ornate walking stick that looked more ceremonial than necessary. Behind him came a blonde woman with a slight European accent, wiping flour-dusted hands on an apron. 2 younger men bounded down the stairs, their argument about something called quarterly projections cutting off mid-sentence when they saw Natalie. Family, Helena announced, clapping her hands once for attention. I'd like you to officially meet Natalie Parker, John's fiancée. Fiancée? The word hit Natalie like a physical blow. In all their discussions about the marriage contract, the word fiancé had never come up. It made everything feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. The patriarch stepped forward first, extending his hand with the kind of firm grip that spoke of decades in boardrooms. Richard Klene, John's father. Natalie's mind reeled. The marriage broker had specifically said John was the bastard son, the family embarrassment. But Richard Klene was treating John like a beloved heir, not a shameful secret. It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Klene. Richard, please. Welcome to the family. He turned to John with obvious pride. She's even more beautiful than you described, son. Again, the references to John describing her. Natalie was beginning to feel like she'd walked into a play where everyone knew their lines except her. The blonde woman approached next, her smile warm and genuine. I'm Ingrid, the family cook, but everyone here treats me more like family than staff. John told me you adore Thai food, so I've prepared a special feast for tonight. Natalie nodded automatically, though she couldn't remember ever mentioning her food preferences to anyone. How had John known? The 2 younger men introduced themselves. As Marcus, the family lawyer, and Daniel, who managed the family's business interests, both were polished, educated, and clearly successful in their own right.
Always.
Nothing about this family suggested they needed to pay someone to marry their problem. Child? Businesses? Natalie asked Daniel. Investments, John answered quickly, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that sent heat racing up her spine. Nothing very interesting. Helena clapped again. Well, let's get you settled, shall we? I've prepared the master suite. On the third floor, as they climbed the curved staircase, Natalie whispered to John, Master suite? As in 1 bedroom? 2 bedrooms, he whispered back. I already arranged it. The suite was larger than Natalie's entire apartment had been, with soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the gardens, and furniture that belonged in a museum. The main bedroom held a king-size bed that could have slept 6 people, while a smaller adjoining room contained a daybed and a desk. John always preferred the smaller room, Helena explained, running her hand along the doorframe with obvious affection. Ever since he was a boy, he's been an insomniac. Didn't want to disturb anyone with his restlessness. Natalie glanced at John, who was staring out the window with an expression she couldn't read. How had Helena known about sleeping arrangements they'd supposedly discussed privately? How thoughtful of him, Natalie managed. Well, I'll leave you to get settled. Dinner is at 7 sharp. Helena paused at the door, her smile taking on a quality that seemed almost predatory. Oh, and Natalie, dear, tomorrow we're going shopping. Shopping? For your wedding dress? Of course. Can't have you renewing your vows in some courthouse. Outfit, the Klene family has traditions to maintain. The door closed behind Helena with a soft click, leaving Natalie and John alone in the opulent suite. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and growing tension. Wedding dress? Natalie turned to face him, her voice rising. Vow renewal? John, what exactly did you forget to mention? John ran his hands through his dark hair, messing up its perfect styling for the first time since she'd met him. Complicated, then uncomplicated. Your family is clearly wealthy beyond imagination. You're obviously not a convicted felon. Your father treats you like a crown prince, not a bastard son. And now we're having some kind of elaborate wedding ceremony. She crossed her arms, anger finally overriding her confusion. What game are you playing? I can't explain everything right now, John said, his voice strained. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Trust you? You are. Something flickered in John's blue eyes, an emotion too complex to name. You're right. You don't know me. But you saved your grandmother's life today, and that's what matters. Natalie sank into one of the suite's expensive armchairs, suddenly exhausted. This is insane, I know. John approached slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. But we're in this together now. I promise you, Natalie, I will keep you safe. Safe from what? John was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens below. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it. From the truth about why you're really here. The words sent ice through her veins, and for the first time since signing that contract. Natalie wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The wedding dress fitting had been a masterclass in subtle interrogation disguised as family bonding. Helena had asked 100 questions while Natalie stood on a pedestal surrounded by mirrors, silk, and the growing certainty that she was drowning. In lies now, walking through the estate's moonlit gardens with John beside her, Natalie felt like she was balanced on the edge of a precipice. The formal dinner had been even worse than the dress fitting, with Richard asking pointed questions about their courtship and Marcus making casual references to John's difficult year. Your family thinks we've been together for months, she said, stopping beside a fountain where stone angels poured eternal water into a pool that reflected the stars. They know details about our relationship that don't exist. They're planning a wedding ceremony for a couple that met 6 hours ago. John's silence stretched between them like a chasm. He stood with his hands in his pockets, still wearing the dinner jacket that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. The moonlight caught the planes of his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. John, I need the truth. All of it. He turned to face her then, and something in his expression made her heart race. You want the truth? The truth is that I've been watching you for 3 months. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Your grandmother's medical bills? The insurance denials, your stepmother's gambling debts. The eviction notice you've been hiding in your textbook. His voice was calm, matter of fact, as if he were discussing the weather. I know you've been surviving on ramen noodles and library vending machine coffee for weeks. I know you donated plasma twice last month to help pay for May's medications. Natalie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. How do you know any of that? Because I had you investigated. John stepped closer, and she could see the conflict warring. In his eyes, 3 months ago, my family decided I needed a wife. It's not for money or social standing, but for survival. There's a clause in my grandfather's will that requires me to be married by my 30th birthday or lose my inheritance and my position in the company. Your 30th birthday is next week. The fountain's gentle splash seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. Natalie stared at him, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. You didn't just happen to need a wife at the same time. My grandmother needed surgery, she said slowly. You orchestrated this. The whole thing. John's hands clenched into fists at his sides. I needed someone desperate enough to agree to the arrangement, but smart enough to fool my family. Someone beautiful, educated, with no criminal background or scandal that could reflect poorly on the Klene name. Someone vulnerable enough to manipulate. Someone I could help while helping myself. His voice cracked slightly on the words. Natalie, you have to understand, my grandfather built this company from nothing. It employs 12,000 people across 6 countries. If I lose control, the board will sell it off in pieces. Thousands of jobs will disappear, so you chose me like I was merchandise. The betrayal cut deeper than she'd expected. Had me investigated like a criminal. It wasn't supposed to be like this. John ran his hands through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. It was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement. But then I met you, and everything changed. Changed how? I watched you in that cafe, stirring your coffee like you were trying to solve the mysteries of the universe. You looked so tired, so worried, but when you smiled at the waitress who spilled water on your table, your whole face lit up. You comforted her instead of getting angry. John's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I realized I wasn't just looking at a suitable bride.
Ow.
I was looking at the most genuinely kind person I'd ever met. Despite her anger, Natalie felt something twist in her chest. That doesn't change what you did. No, it doesn't. But it changed what I wanted to do. John stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. The story I told Helena today, about how we met. Part of me wishes it had been true. Which part? All of it. Meeting you by accident instead of design. Having you choose to talk to me because you cared, not because you were paid to. Falling in love naturally instead of manufacturing it for an audience. The word love hung between them like a challenge. Natalie's heart was racing, but she couldn't tell if it was from anger, fear, or something more dangerous. Your family doesn't know the truth. They know I needed to get married quickly. They assume it's because I fell head over heels for someone inappropriate and finally decided to settle down rather than lose everything. John's laugh was bitter. They think I'm finally growing up in the prison story, the convicted felon. My cousin Marcus's idea. He thought if you believed you were marrying someone desperate and lower class, you'd be less likely to ask questions or make demands. Your cousin, the lawyer, who specializes in crafting elaborate deceptions for wealthy clients who need to disappear problems. John's expression grew darker. This isn't his first marriage arrangement, Natalie. It's just the first one, where the groom started having second thoughts. A chill ran down Natalie's spine. How many other women have you done this to? None. This was supposed to be my first and only arranged marriage. John reached toward her, then let his hand fall back to his side. But Marcus has handled dozens of similar situations for other families. Wealthy men who need wives for business reasons, inheritances, immigration issues. There's an entire industry built around it. Industry. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Women for sale to the highest bidder. It's not supposed to be like that. Most of the arrangements are mutually beneficial. The women get financial security, social status, protection. What do they give up? John was quiet for a long moment. Their freedom to choose. The truth of it settled between them like a heavy blanket. Natalie thought of all the other women who might have stood in gardens like this one, learning that their lives had been bought and sold like commodities. What happens now? She asked. That's up to you. John's voice was barely audible. The money for your grandmother's surgery can't be taken back. It's yours regardless of what you decide. But the marriage, the contract, all of it, you can walk away if you want to. And if I walk away, I lose everything. But I'll survive. I have money in accounts Marcus doesn't know about, properties and other names. I can start over. Natalie stared at him, trying to reconcile this vulnerable man with the confident stranger who'd walked into Murphy's cafe. Why are you telling me this? You could have kept lying, gone through with the ceremony, gotten your inheritance. Because you deserve to know what you were really agreeing to. John met her eyes steadily. And because somewhere in the last few hours this stopped being about business for me. What's it about now? You. The word was simple, honest, devastating. It's about you, Natalie. And the fact that I'm falling for a woman who has every reason to hate me. Before she could respond, footsteps crunched on the gravel behind them. Marcus appeared out of the shadows, his expression grim in the moonlight. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Helena is asking questions about the timeline. She wants to see engagement photos, social media posts, evidence of your relationship. And Miranda called. She's threatening to expose everything unless we double her payment. Natalie felt the walls closing in around her. What does that mean? Marcus looked between them, his expression unreadable. It means we're out of time for confessions and second thoughts. The wedding is tomorrow, and if this falls apart now, it won't just be John who suffers. There are other people involved, other arrangements that depend on this marriage happening. What other arrangements? Natalie demanded. John's face had gone pale. Marcus, you said this was a simple inheritance issue. I said what you needed to hear to get you to cooperate. Marcus's smile was cold. The Klene family business isn't just investments, Natalie. We facilitate arrangements for wealthy families who need problems solved discreetly. John's marriage legitimizes our operation, makes us look like a traditional family business instead of what we really are. Which is what? The people you call when you need someone to disappear. The fountain's splash seemed to grow deafeningly. Loud as the implications sank in, Natalie looked at John, whose face had gone from pale to gray. You didn't know, she said. It wasn't a question, I swear to you, I had no idea. John turned to Marcus, fury radiating from every line of his body. You bastard, you've been using me. We've been using each other. And now, we're all in too deep to back out. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them a photo. It was Natalie, taken through a telephoto lens as she left the hospital earlier that day. There are 12 other women currently in similar arrangements. If this marriage doesn't happen, if our operation gets exposed, they all become liabilities. You're threatening to hurt innocent women. I'm explaining the consequences of failure. Marcus pocketed his phone. The wedding happens tomorrow. You play your parts convincingly, and everyone stays safe. It's really very simple. As Marcus walked back toward the house, leaving them alone in the garden, Natalie realized that what she'd thought was a simple marriage of convenience had become something far more sinister. She wasn't just John's fake bride. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, played by people who treated human lives like chess pieces. Natalie, John said softly, I'm so sorry. She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her grandmother's life and might have doomed them both. Sorry doesn't fix this. No, he agreed. But maybe we can. Oh, John's expression hardened with determination. By being smarter than they think we are. As they walked back toward the house together, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's wedding would be less of a beginning and more of an ending. The question was, an ending for whom? The wedding dress hung in the early morning light, like a ghost of dreams Natalie had never dared to have. French lace cascaded from pearl-covered bodice to silk train, a masterpiece worth more than most people's annual salaries. She would wear it to marry a man she'd known for less than 24 hours. In front of a family that dealt in human trafficking disguised as marriage arrangements, her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. May was awake, asking for her, and responding well to the surgery. The relief should have been overwhelming, but instead Natalie felt only a hollow ache where gratitude should have been. Her grandmother was alive because Natalie had sold herself. Two people who destroyed other women's lives for profit. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in." John entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, still wearing the clothes from last night. His hair was disheveled and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept any more than she had. "Thought you might need this." He set one cup on the dresser, keeping careful distance between them.
Thank you.
The coffee was perfect, exactly how she liked it, which only reminded her how thoroughly he'd had her investigated. "Did you find anything?" They'd spent hours after Marcus left searching through John's laptop, looking for evidence of the other women Marcus had mentioned, anything they could use to expose the operation or protect the victims. Some financial records that don't make sense, payments to lawyers in 12 different states, all handled through shell companies. John sank into the armchair by the window, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Nothing concrete enough to take to the authorities. "The FBI contact you mentioned?" Sarah Chen. "She was my roommate's girlfriend at Harvard. Now she's with the white-collar crime division in Chicago. But if I call her with nothing but suspicions and theories, Marcus will know someone talked. The other women will disappear before she can find them." Natalie stared at her reflection in the antique mirror, trying to see past the fear in her own eyes. "So we go through with it. The wedding, the arrangement. We play our parts until we can gather real evidence." "Natalie, no." John stood abruptly, coffee forgotten. "I won't ask you to sacrifice yourself for my mistakes. There has to be another way." "What other way?" "You heard Marcus. If this falls apart, innocent women die. Your family business continues, destroying lives, and you lose everything you've worked for." She turned to face him. "At least this way we have a chance to stop them from the inside. And what if we can't? What if we get trapped in this life, and 5 years from now, you're still married to me, still pretending to be happy while Marcus continues his trafficking operation?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Natalie had been trying not to think about the long-term implications, focusing instead on immediate survival. "Then at least 12 other women are safe," she said finally. "Maybe we save the next ones." John crossed the room in 3 quick strides, stopping just inches away from her. "You're talking about sacrificing your entire future for people I'll never meet, who don't even know I exist." Natalie met his eyes steadily. "Yes, I am." "Why?" The answer came from a place deeper than logic, deeper than self-preservation. "Because my grandmother spent her whole life putting other people first. She raised me, worked 2 jobs to pay for my education, gave up her own dreams so I could chase mine, taught me that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, and you do it anyway." John's hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You're extraordinary. I'm terrified. So am I." His voice was barely a whisper, but not of Marcus or his threats. "I'm terrified that I'm falling in love with you, and you'll never be able to see past how we met to forgive me, John. ... I know. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. But I need you to know that last night, when I saw the fear in your eyes, I would have burned down everything I've ever built to keep you safe." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "Don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life." His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer. "Natalie, if we do this, if we go through with this wedding, I need you to know it won't be fake for me. Not anymore." Before she could respond, her phone rang. Lena's name flashed on the screen, and the spell between them shattered. "Time to get ready, darling," Helana's voice sang through the speaker. "The hair and makeup team will be up in 10 minutes. 3 hours later, Natalie stood at the back of the estate's ballroom, her hand resting on Richard Klene's offered arm. The room had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. With thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers, and enough candles to illuminate a small city, 200 guests filled the gilt chairs, representing Chicago's most powerful families. At the altar, John waited in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the wealthy heir he was supposed to be. But when their eyes met across the flower-strewn aisle, Natalie saw the same man who had confessed his feelings in the pre-dawn darkness. Vulnerable and afraid and real. The wedding march began, and Richard started walking her forward. Each step felt momentous, irreversible. Halfway down the aisle, she spotted Marcus in the front row, his expression satisfied and predatory. Behind him sat a woman Natalie didn't recognize. But something about her hollow expression and expensive clothes suggested she might be another victim of Marcus's arrangements. Then they reached the altar, and Richard placed her hand in John's. And suddenly nothing else mattered except the man standing before her. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional words and expected responses. Natalie heard herself promising to love, honor, and cherish a man she'd known for one day. John's voice was steady as he made the same vows, but his hands trembled slightly as he slipped the wedding ring onto her finger. "You may kiss the bride." John's lips met hers softly, almost hesitantly, and for a moment the kiss was purely for show. Then something shifted, and his hand cupped the back of her neck. And suddenly the kiss was real and desperate and full of everything they couldn't say out loud. The crowd erupted in applause. They broke apart, both breathing hard. "Ladies and gentlemen," the minister announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. John Klene." The reception was a masterclass in Chicago high society. With champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's rent, and conversations that danced around business deals worth millions. Natalie played her part perfectly, smiling and accepting congratulations, while her mind raced with plans and possibilities. During their first dance, John pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "I've been thinking about what you said," stopping them from the inside. "And I think I know how to do it, but it means staying married for real, not just 6 months. It means building a life together while we gather evidence." Natalie looked up into his blue eyes, seeing determination, mixed with something that might have been hope. "How long?" "Maybe years, maybe forever, if we can't find another way out." The music swirled around them as other couples joined them on the dance floor. Natalie thought about her grandmother, recovering in her hospital bed. She thought about the 12 women Marcus had mentioned, trapped in arrangements they couldn't escape. She thought about the woman in the front row with the hollow eyes. "John," she said softly. "Yes. Ask me again in a year if I regret this choice, and if you do, then we'll figure out how to fix it together." His smile transformed his entire face. Together. As the evening wore on and the last guests finally departed, Natalie found herself alone with John in their opulent suite. The wedding dress hung in the closet like a beautiful lie, and she changed into simple pajamas that felt more honest than silk and lace. "So," she said, sitting cross-legged on the bed they would now share, "how do we bring down a human trafficking operation without getting ourselves killed?" John laughed, and the sound was lighter than she'd heard from him before. "Very carefully, and with a lot of help from people who know what they're doing. Starting with your FBI friend, starting with trust." Sat beside her, still wearing his tuxedo shirt with the tie loosened around his neck. "We have to trust each other completely if this is going to work." "Then let's start with complete honesty." Natalie turned to face him fully. "I'm attracted to you, genuinely, not just for show. That scares me because I don't know if it's real or if it's just adrenaline and proximity and the fact that you literally saved my grandmother's life." "I can answer that," John said quietly. "It's real. At least, it is for me. I started falling for you the moment you asked where to sign that contract, knowing it would change your life forever because it was the only way to save someone you loved. And I started falling for you when you told me the truth about the investigation, even though it meant I might walk away." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the admission settle between them. "So what now?" Natalie asked. "Now we figure out how to be married for real while pretending to be married for show, all while secretly working to destroy the people who brought us together. John's expression was wry. Pretty sure there's no manual for this situation, then we'll write our own. John reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. Natalie Parker, clean. That's going to take some getting used to. We have time. His thumb brushed across her wedding ring, the simple gold band that now bound them together in more ways than either had expected. All the time in the world. Outside their window, Chicago glittered in the darkness, a city full of secrets, impossibilities. Somewhere in that urban sprawl, 12 women waited for rescue they didn't know was coming. Somewhere, Marcus was planning his next arrangement, treating human lives like business transactions. But in this room, in this moment, two people who had been strangers 24 hours ago held hands and planned to save the world together. One carefully orchestrated deception at a time. It wasn't the love story either of them had imagined. But as John leaned over to kiss her goodnight, soft and sweet and full of promise, Natalie realized it might be the only love story that mattered. They had work to do, lives to save, a criminal empire to dismantle, but first, they had each other. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The end.